Craig, thank you for coming on.
Sam, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So, I want to start, obviously, the row is the big thing we're going to talk about
Uh-huh.
today. So, rowing the Atlantic is a massive thing, and to go straight to that for anyone would be a big step. Did you have any challenges that you did to prep yourself? Have you always been someone who sort of challenged yourself to things?
Yeah, so it's a strange story how the Atlantic came about, but pre-Atlantic, I've always done challenges my whole life. So um, yeah, if you chat to my mum from a young child, if there's trees to climb or something, I'd have to try and climb the highest tree and bits and pieces like that. So I've always probably lucky really. I've always challenged myself. So done lots and lots of challenges over the years in the fire service,
Yeah.
from Everest Base Camp, the Three Peaks, the Cockleshell Heroes, all those types of things. Just raising money for the firefighters charity and challenging yourself. So yeah, I love to challenge myself. Yeah.
Mm. What is it about challenging yourself that you enjoy so much?
I think people in life don't challenge themselves enough. So I think people will go through life and without challenging yourself, you'll never know truly what you're capable of. So um success, failure, it's all about the challenge. So if you succeed at the challenge, amazing. But if you don't, you can still learn from that. So yeah. So for me, the primary drive for being um for doing a challenge is to be out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Um and over the years, if I can tie that in as part of a team, which obviously then raises money for charity, which then would help others less fortunate than me. So there's 4 or 5 wins along the way there. So it just sort of fits in really. So
Yeah, I think there's something special about putting yourself in that discomfort zone, like you talk about. And like you say, life is a challenge, but by putting yourself into uncomfortable positions, you can practice sort of being in that. So there's things that happen in life that aren't, you can't prep for, like
mhm.
things that are going to make you feel uncomfortable and certain emotions, but you can do the best you can by prepping yourself in things you can put yourself to. So trying to do those challenges, pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. And that is where growth happens as a person. You then learn a lot about yourself, about your mentality, and you build like an evidence base, don't you? So I bet
Mhm.
when you look back on things now and you feel like there's a bit of a challenge, you can look back at all those things you've done
Mm.
and be like, I did that. Like, I can do this. I'm feeling like this. I remember feeling like this on X challenge. So you sort of can recall that in that moment as well going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so for me now, it's not definitely not hit a wall, but myself and Stu and my rowing partner, what do we do next? So if you looked at the challenges that I've done and do and they always sort of ramp up or increase slightly depending on your comfort zone and what you think you can achieve and as you get older, challenges are a little bit more harder. But yeah, so now obviously we rode the Atlantic. There's always that question mark of what's next. So we have a plan.
Okay.
So we do have a plan. But yeah, when you go, and I liken that to Johnny Wilkinson. I once read a quote from Johnny Wilkinson, the rugby player.
Yep.
So he was very very young when England won the World Cup, and obviously playing rugby, on a rugby field, and his journey to becoming an England international, and then scoring that kick goal, and then we win the World Cup. He achieved his ultimate goal at such a young age. How does he then stay motivated, or what does he do next? So
Mm,
how does he drive and move forward? And I'm not saying nothing like Johnny Wilkinson or a rugby player, but the analogy of you've done something that's so extreme that was so tough, but I've got to do better than that now. So I've got
yeah.
the drive is to increase that. So what's next?
Yeah.
And that's always a question, and I always get asked that as well. So what's next, type thing. So
That's, yeah, something I was reading about quite recently. In fact, there's a former Royal Marine Commando called Gareth Timmins. I'm reading his book at the minute,
hmm
and he was talking about this. It's like once you spend all that time in training to get that green beret,
hmm
you think that's going to be it, you've made it. But then it's just
yeah,
like, what's next? Like, where am I going to get
absolutely.
that next challenge?
And it's yeah, where does it end? And lots of people say that, where will it end, Craig? And all,
Yeah.
but Yeah, I don't know. Just keep planning. Don't
Yeah, just
just
enjoy it.
focus on the next challenge, enjoy it, and yeah,
Yeah.
what will be will be.
Are you allowed to tell us what the next challenge is, or is it too
But it
soon?
depends if my wife's going to watch this or not. So, yeah. So me and Stu, we're probably going to look at rowing the Pacific, not the whole Pacific. So we go from Monterey Bay in San Francisco, California, and then we go to Hawaii. So
Yeah.
it's a similar distance to crossing the Atlantic,
Yeah.
different seas, in a rowing boat. So we still keep the rowing theme. We've got the Minds Matter, you know, um, set up. So yeah, we're going to sort of work towards that. So
Awesome. So you're not sick of rowing yet?
I love rowing. So actually, the strange thing is rowing's become um, again, you sort of digress, but to achieve anything, you need discipline and consistency. Whilst on the row, but when I've come back, very very strange. I was never into rowing before the Atlantic. I used to do a lot of running and bits and pieces. It was never really rowing. And when you've done something consistently, with discipline every single day, 2 hours on, 2 hours off for that length of time, you genuinely, lots of people say, you're sick of rowing, Craig. Yeah, but you're not. So,
Yeah.
and I miss it. So I row 9 times out of 10 with Stu and obviously with work commitments, but we row every morning.
Right.
So I take, it's become like there's so many people that talk to us and stop. We take our rowing machines to South Sea Seafront,
Okay.
set them up, and we row for an hour every morning, rain or shine. And it's become like a permanent fixture, really. People, morning, kind of morning, Stu. But yeah, so that consistency and that discipline. And the reason I do it by the sea, people say, well, why don't you just do it in a gym club? Because I miss that solitude and simplicity of life so much. So you get the sounds of the waves,
Hmm.
whatever the weather throws at you, the smell of the sea, the noise, and the whole thing. This will sound crazy, but I can close my eyes and go back to when my life was probably at its simplest, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that. You spoke about how it came around, so let's go into that. So, how did the idea for rowing the Atlantic first come up?
with the strange part of the story is it wasn't my idea, and with no disrespect whatsoever, it wasn't on my list to do.
Okay.
So the actual row came about from Stu, who was my rowing partner, and another guy called Adam Bundle. So they're both firefighters in Hampshire. They're both at St Mary's at the time, and you'll probably remember this, Sam. We had a tragic call in Hampshire, Shirley Towers, where we lost two firefighters.
Hmm.
Um, so on that watch, Stu managed Red Watch St Mary's, and he really, really struggled after that, as did lots of firefighters, and people still struggle with that today. You know that. Yeah, it was a really, really sad time, and lots of people struggled in our service still to this day. But immediately after that incident, um, on top of that, Stu actually donated a kidney, so he saved he saved amazing. He saved a guy's life. So Stu only has one kidney. Donated a kidney, but after the kidney, on top of Shirley Towers, his mental health really deteriorated. So he had a breakdown. I think he had two. He was off work for 8, 9 months. Um, Tried to take his own life a couple of times and hit rock bottom. So he woke up one morning, and this is the story that he tells me, and he searched on the computer because he lost his identity and lost all of those things that you need to do a challenge. He didn't have any of those qualities, or he did, but he couldn't find them.
Mm.
So he searched on Google, what would be the hardest thing for me to do? And the first thing that popped up for him was the world's toughest row, or as it was then, the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge. And that was it. The seed was sown. So he said, this is what I need to do to get back to the person I was pre Shirley Towers, pre kidney donation. And then they bought a boat and they set the name and they did lots of fundraising and everything else. But then the first year they were supposed to do it, COVID happened. So the race was cancelled.
Right.
The second year that Adam and Stu were going to do it, Stu injured his back. And then the third year, I think Adam had some personal issues with his family. So the main sponsor for us was a company called Tube. They're amazing. They're an internet firm in Portsmouth. So look, we think, we've advertised this. We think it'd be wise to have a reserve rower. Stu and Adam phoned me up. I said, you fancy going for a beer? Now that wouldn't be out of the blue. And to be fair, wasn't really aware of the rowing or anything really. And so to go out with Stu for a pint wouldn't be a rare thing. We've been friends since we joined. We joined at the same time. We went for a drink in the Churchillian pub. A long story short, Craig, do you fancy helping us out with something? Yep, that's cool. Do you want to be a reserve rower for the Atlantic? And I said, and it's really, really strange. People often ask me, like, how did you get involved? I said, yeah, that's cool. Be a reserve rower. It's what's not to like? I can train, I'll definitely be out of my comfort zone because I'm not from a maritime background or anything.
Mm.
All the courses you have to do prior to the row, yeah, sign me up. No problem at all. And we did. And the three of us, we did some training rows and we attended all the courses that you had to do. And I'd been on the team for probably 2 months or whatever. So this was in the February. April, Adam pulls out, and now I've got my seat. So there's sort of a life lesson there, really, because, and I still say to, Stu could have asked me to help him with anything, not rob a bank or something like that, but,
It could have been
something,
that.
something's good, I could have done, but something good. And I said, yeah, Stu, of course I'll help you out, and I always liken it to just moving a settee, like, Stu, Craig, can you come and help me move a settee? Yeah, of course I can. But then when Adam pulled out, a penny dropped, and I thought, right, I better look at what I'm signing up to, really. Because I'm one of those guys, if you do anything, I don't really want to know about it until we get there type thing. So I Googled it, and then I thought, right, I better take it serious because I was only ever a reserve.
Yeah.
So I thought it's just an insurance policy for these guys to go and do a row if one of them hurt their arm or whatever. But now I was in the seat and I had to take it serious. Yeah, and then I went home, watched a video on it on YouTube and thought, my God, I've got to take this serious and get the training. So then the mindset clicked in and that's how the row came about, really.
Yeah.
So, that it
No, so it's
wasn't, I
quite
can't take any credit for it at all. So,
yeah, it's quite a different way into it than maybe some people do.
Yeah.
So how long before the row was it you found out, sorry?
So they asked me to come onto the team in February.
Yeah.
We did a couple of months training. In April, Adam pulled out.
Yeah.
For personal reasons. So, and the race start was in December.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So my length of training,
About
was
8
relatively
months
short, really.
Yeah. In those first 2 months before you got told you were going to do it, were you training as hard as you were after, or did you?
Honestly?
Yeah.
No. I would turn up to every row for us. So do every training row. So we'd get out in the boat as much as you could. And our theory behind that is you can sit on a row machine, but let's get out in the boat, in the water, and find out how the boat works, what trim, how to trim it, how to do changeovers, and you can't get better practice than actually being in the boat you're going to do it in. So yeah, training was fine, and I was on the row machine, and trying to put on a bit of weight as well. That was key. Yeah, everything was cool, but I never really thought I was committed. But I didn't really thought I'd get my opportunity, So it was just an insurance policy, hanging out with two good guys, doing something different, and that was a challenge enough for me, really. So yeah, just I didn't think I'd get my seat. So
Yeah. And obviously the prep for it. So obviously a lot of rowing, a lot of getting out on the actual boat, like you said. That's the physical side of it. Was there any mental prep you did for it? Because it's a long time to be away with just one other person.
yeah. So with regards to my mental approach to it, and I don't want to sound arrogant and stuff, but I don't know. I always knew that I could do it. So if a freak of nature or the boat malfunctions or something like that, then all of those things are out of your hands. If you do, if you went and did a marathon and you broke your leg, but your actual what drives you to do it, I knew it was achievable. So my mental preparation, in hindsight, there's probably a few things I would have done different.
What would those be?
So I think if you look to the approach to the row, and I've been asked by quite a few other teams, it's a real close network, the rowing network. I didn't realise this. So there's teams that are getting prepped for this year's race and last year's race that have emailed so many questions and chats and phone conversations about what would you do different, So just getting as much information as you can really prior to doing it. And we've shared if we did it again or for the Pacific, our prep would be different. But I think so for the row for me personally, I think you can break. So I broke Craig Sadler down into 3 different areas. So I think there's physical strength. So at my age, I got myself in pretty good nick for rowing, really. Put on as much weight as I could. and I'll touch on that in a minute. But the most important thing I say to lots of people is stay injury free.
Yeah.
So if you have a niggle or something, then make sure you don't want to get in that boat with a shoulder strain or injury or anything like that. So there's physical strength, and I think, again, not arrogant, I think it was in as best a nick I could have been really pre-row with the weight on. I think there's mental strength, and I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think that I'm unbreakable in that department. It's something would have to seriously go wrong for me to stop rowing. I just know that I can do that. But the tricky one, the third one, is emotional strength. So that was a tough one for me, and the road taught me that I didn't realise, that length of time away from my family and my friends, how much that was my struggling point. It wasn't, there is a physical aspect to it, and there's definitely a mental aspect to it, but my emotional strength
Mm.
was. So I learned I have to work on that. So
Right.
I value my relationships with my family, and my friends a lot more since I've come home, and I actually invest a lot more in them. I took a lot for granted prior to the road,
Mm.
and that's sort of what I struggled with most, really.
Mm. It's quite a
So
life changing sort of
yeah,
realization
definitely.
maybe on that boat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, and you spoke about having to put on weight. Why was that important?
So because there's a massive deficit, because the calorie intake for you to row. So we initially started with 2 hours on, 2 hours off rowing. Your body breaks down pretty quick in the Atlantic, so muscle soreness, open sores. I don't mean to be rude, but your bum's in terrible nick, your hands are in terrible nick. It ulcerates. It's so tough. Um, that me and Stu ended up deciding we just do an hour on and an hour off. And you probably towards the end of the road, probably the last maybe 3-4 weeks, you would cry or tears would roll down when you sit on the seat. That would soon go
Yeah.
once you start running, but that initial sitting on sores and stuff is
Yeah, I
is
bet.
horrendous. But yeah, so that was tough. But your calorie deficit, so the food, and you think you can eat a lot out there, but in an hour to get some rest and to take on food and then initially row, it was cramps. It was all hydrated food. And because we got caught in a storm after probably about 2 weeks at sea, we got caught in a really bad storm. We were the most northerly boat. So we were stuck. So we had 4 non-rowing days. But that the damage from the storm, we didn't have means to heat any food. So we
Oh,
lost all power. The 2 jet boils we had to cook your hydrated food were ruined.
oh
And
no.
we tried to a bit of maintenance and tried to get them working, and they just wouldn't. So we didn't eat hot food after 10 days of the row
For the rest of it.
for the rest of it.
Oh
So it
wow.
was just hydrated food. We put water in, and your brain, again, you can sort of train your brain to think it's something it's not. So if you left, we would make a bag in the morning
Yeah.
and leave it on deck to heat up by the sun through the day, and kid yourself at night that that would be warm enough to eat
Hot
as a meal.
food, yeah.
So it was hot food. So and you have some snack packs, which is your sweets and your jelly beans and all that sort of stuff, which sounds amazing, but you soon get sick of high sugar stuff. So that they advise you to put on as much weight as you can so that you go really heavy. Um, which is strange because you think, oh, that'd be great. I'd love to eat McDonald's and pizza and rubbish all the time and get some weight on. But when you actually want to physically concentrate and put on weight on, it's really, really tough.
Mm.
So, but mine and Stu's boat, in the year we did it, there's not a pair that's lost more weight than me and Stu.
Really?
Yeah, so I lost 21 kilos and Stu lost 25 kilos.
Wow.
Yeah, so I finished at 78 and he was just above, which for me now I'm probably 93, 94 kilos.
Yeah.
And
I was gonna say in the photo of you at the end,
yeah,
you do look a bit.
and that's not intentional weight loss or anything. That's
Yeah.
just you know,
Yeah.
I
It's
mean, we
very
ran out of
demanding on the
food.
body, of
We ran
course.
out of food with like a week to go anyway. So,
Really?
yeah, so
Oh no.
that's another story. But yeah, so
What
uh,
happened there?
because we planned. So um, we looked at it and we looked how we performed in the Solent and the back of the Isle of Wight and going across to Swanage and Bournemouth. And we thought, realistically, with the pace that me and Stu row at as a pair and 1 up and 2 up, we could probably do it inside 50 days.
Mm.
So our goal initially was 50 days. And I think if we had good weather, so we had those 2 storm fronts, one at the start of the race, one at the end of the race, and all the problems that that caused us, I think we would have done 50 days. But Mother Nature, and I always say this to people, um, if you're going to row the Atlantic and you get out in the Solent or the back of the Nab Tower in the Isle of Wight in a 4, 7 or 8, and you think at the time, you think, God, this is hairy, and especially not being from a sailing background and stuff. So this is really out of our comfort zone, both of us. Um, it's nothing to what the wave systems and heights of waves and the weather in the Atlantic. And I don't know if you could recreate that. That was, I don't know how that part of your training or prep you could recreate with that. Maybe in the North Sea, it can be rough. But some of the roughest, most frightening waters I've seen, sort of thing. But so we had 50 days worth of food, and a lot of our food got damaged in the storm because our boat was flooded.
Right.
So all of your sweets and everything, even though in waterproof bags, they ruptured, and where the boat gets thrown around all over the place, some of these bags split, and you can't eat it. So a lot of food was damaged, and we had 50 days worth. So we were rationing. Yeah,
Wow.
we were rationing food towards the end, sort of thing. So.
Yeah. Well, that would explain the weight loss, I suppose.
Yeah, you can't get those calories in really.
Yeah.
So, yeah, tough.
And what sort of things is there anything that you had to consider that people may not realize that you would have had to consider, like in the prep or during the row?
I think so. Your boat has an MOT, so it has one pre-shipping, and then when you get to La Gomera, which is where you set off from just by Tenerife, it has another MOT, and they're really really stringent. So Atlantic campaigns, or the toughest row as it is now, they're fantastic. They won't let you row that event if you're not ready.
Mm.
But never. So the learning point for us, the first thing would be how severe the weather can be.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know how you'd recreate that, but so that was sort of a baptism of fire, really, and a total loss of power. So for a total loss of power, really, it should have been race over for us. So Stu was going to call it. So after the first storm, all the batteries, which we had lead acid batteries, not lithium, so the salt water flooded the compartments and everything was dead. So you need to be able to make water. So we can, you can't hydrate your food and you can't take on your water without power. You have to make water with a water maker.
Mm.
And that's the most, that draws the most power from your batteries. I mean, your batteries need to be above 11 volts for even that to fire up. So we had 0. So at that point in the race, I say race, we were never racing. It was just to get across
Yeah,
for us.
it's a challenge.
Stu, you have a satellite phone, so you can contact the race organizer and say, look, this is the problem. And they're very, very good. So we got total loss of power. And he said, look, that's a Mayday. Do you want us to initiate a rescue for you? And I said to Stu, well, like the firefighters, it's what we do. There's always a problem. We'll do our very, very best to overcome that and adapt. I said, so give me literally a day to strip everything down, dry it out, have a look at the system, and then we'll go from there. And so Stu inquired about a rescue time for us, and the nearest vessel to us at that point was 4 days away.
Wow.
So then that puts in perspective how isolated and irrelevant and insignificant you are in this vast ocean.
Mm.
So, and luckily I'm not an electrician or anything special. So what I did was, you have a battery, you have this wiring, there's some like inverters and lots of technical stuff up to some panels. So I just bypassed a lot. So I hardwired a solar panel outside of the boat onto the battery, and it was almost like an Apollo 13 moment. It started to fire up, and it went to 1 volt on the voltmeter, to 2, to 3, to 4. And we managed, they were 14-volt batteries. We managed to get them to 11.3, 11.5, which is very lucky. And then, but we didn't have any power for anything else. So we nursed our way across and just concentrated on making water. And that would only be on a sunny day when there's no clouds at midday from 12 till 2 and the sun's the brightest. So water was the most important thing. So, yeah.
That's a great story of like overcoming that challenge and like things
Yeah.
that you just, like you say, that's out of your control almost. Hitting that storm, the water coming in, but what can you do on the other side of it to make something work, or at least try before giving up? Talk me through a day in the life on the boat. Then you sort of spoke about how you sort of did your shifts, but what was it like?
So people think it's boring, but every day is different. So weather systems are different, and how we. And one of the things that me and Stu decided, and we learnt early on, is that as a pair, you think it's comforting, but it's probably the loneliest experience you can have. So
Mm.
when you're on the oars, Stu rests. When Stu's on the oars, I rest. So we only ever see each other for a changeover, which in rough weather had to be really slick because you clipped on, balance the boat, pick in between a wave to get into the rowing position and stuff. Then you'd have to fight to get it back round to the direction you wanted. So what we did is for our daily routine, we said we would sacrifice 2 shifts, so 2 rest periods. So we would row a period of 4 hours together so that you had that interaction and conversation. Because we were just two strangers. One would be locked in a cabin and the other would be out rowing, and then such a lonely experience. So if you did it as a solo, your expectation is that it's going to be lonely. If you do it a pair, there's no expectation you'll be lonely. So the routine is because you're mid-Atlantic, there's 12 hours of light, 12 hours of day. So it's, you know, um, and it's 2 hours on and 2 hours off. So a routine is very, very, it's consistent. It's about discipline, and it's pretty much about being honest. You've got to put a good shift in. So you get on the oars, and how you do that is an individual thing. But and you have an auto tiller on there that sometimes can, but with no power. So me and Stu pretty much foot steered nearly all 3,000 miles because of a power issue. So that when you see our tracker, it can zigzag and spin around and stuff
So
like
it
that.
would have normally auto steered in that right
Yeah,
direction for you, and all you
yeah. So you can program it.
right.
So you can take a sat. So we didn't have a. So again, you have to keep a visual lookout because we didn't have our AIS. So we've got no navigation. So in hindsight, that was absolutely amazing because we navigated across the Atlantic Ocean without any war stories by the stars, a sea chart, and a compass.
Wow.
So we didn't have any navigational aids at all to get across because the storm wiped out, and our batteries, again, the two highest things is a water maker and your auto ham drains the power so much. So you got, I mean, I'm not like a Patrick Moore or anything, but I always look up to the sky and face the way that I rode, you know, on the road sort of thing.
Right.
Um, so the star constellations and how they come up and then how they go for sunset and the moon phases and yeah, just incredible. So
Mm.
when I look back and I think that's a real privilege to do that. At the time, it was an absolute nightmare, really.
Yeah. It's one of those things you can only see after the fact. It's like when you've
After the fact and adversity. So everything that went wrong for our row, and it's when you look at the Atlantic campaigns boat setup, it's a lot of money to enter that event, and we had some great sponsors and the people that donated to us and to all the charities and stuff were fantastic, and we couldn't have done it without them. But when you go out there, myself and Stu and Minds Matter were the complete underdogs because we were in an old wooden Adkin rowing boat. It's already done three crossings.
right, okay.
It's rusty. It leaks. So it was almost like Cool Runnings. We would never, to get across would be a massive achievement. Everyone else is in fiberglass Rannoch boats with fans and buttons, and I'm not taking it away from any other team. It's
Mm.
a hell of an achievement to do it in any boat, but people really bought into me and Stu because they knew we were just firefighters. There's no sailing background. We did it on a shoestring, and everyone wheeled us across, which was amazing, really. So, and everything that happened to us out there, the Marlin attack, the batteries, the 2 storms, the hallucinations, and Stu suffered really bad with those. So all of those, not negatives, but things that can impact your performance, we overcome everything.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
I think that's what people do, isn't it? Like when you're in that moment, it's always going to feel like horrible. Like, ah, why? Why is
why
this?
us?
But
You know,
when you look back on something, you think, wow, all of those things we overcame. So had you done it in one of the fancier boats and
yeah.
nothing had really gone wrong, you'd still be massively proud of yourself,
Mm,
but you wouldn't have that ability to look back and think that went wrong. We had no power after day
absolutely.
10 and we still did it. And like they thought we should probably get rescued, but we said no, we carried on. Like
Hmm.
that's phenomenal to look back on and sort of think that. So you've got a lot of extra sort of again that sort of bits of evidence that you can overcome that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, and I always go back to, it was really, really strange, and I always felt, and I don't speak for Stu, 'cause I don't think he, but I always felt at any point the Atlantic or Mother Nature or whatever your spiritual or religious beliefs are, is that someone can pull the plug. So I believed in consistency for me and discipline just to keep rowing, and I think we'll touch on the mindset in a bit, but just to get that done. But I never ever lost sight of you are in somebody else's backyard, somewhere
Mm,
where you're not supposed to survive, with all of the wildlife, the weather systems, the isolation. Um, so I think in anything you do, I think if you stay humble and definitely respect your surroundings and stuff, then I think the Atlantic lets you cross.
mm,
I don't think you cross it. I
yeah.
think people might think that, but I think me and Stu got lucky. We stayed honest. We stayed true. Um, and Mother Nature or the Atlantic thought, these guys are digging out, they'll
Mm.
get
I
across.
like that way of
Uh,
looking at it.
And I genuinely believe that's the case.
Yeah. And so obviously, I imagine landing at the end was probably the highest point potentially. But was there any other points on the trip? What would you say the highest point other than that would be?
Yeah, so I always get, so that's definitely Stu's highest point, is finishing and achieving his goal. For me, it wasn't. So this sounds crazy. So I found the whole finish, and with no disrespect to anybody, because my wife had flown out, and my son and my brother came to meet me the next day. And this, where you haven't seen civilization, we saw three. And to put it in perspective, when you actually cross the Atlantic, we saw three vessels, two tankers and a sailing yacht in 65 days.
Wow.
So it's not like you can wave to another boat, and you don't see anybody. It is completely isolated. So then to go into this harbour on your final approach with all of these yachts, and Antigua stands still for it. It's massive out there. They lovely part of the world, lovely people, and they really, really take care of it. But it stands still. There's foghorns and cannons going off from the fort and fireworks, and I found that whole experience overwhelming. And all I wanted to do was eat something, see my wife, not in that order, see my wife, eat something, and then just sleep. All of the razzmatazz and everything I could have done without that bit. And my highlight, it's a real strange story, and I tell everybody this because it's relative for life. So we ran out of food, probably not far off of 2 weeks to the finish, really. Scraps and bits and pieces. And we did a rowing change, and me and Stu are in bad nick. So our bums are in bad nick, our hands are in bad nick. We're exhausted, we're hallucinating, and we're putting in a shift. And then it was a rowing change, and Stu's a selfless guy, yeah. So um, he's a great bloke, and I went in for my rowing change, and there was a little note and half a packet of KP peanuts
Right.
on in the cabin,
Salted.
salted,
Yeah.
old school.
Nice.
They used to be on the rack behind the
Yeah.
bar. So, and I can remember, for me, I started crying because we hadn't eaten anything for such a long time. So I opened the cabin and said, "Stu, mate, you've left some nuts here." And he said, "That's for you, Sads. I've kept them." And then I cried some more. Um, I remember getting these half a packet of KP peanuts, pouring them into a Tupperware dish, and I ate one by one, sucked the salt off, crunched it, and they lasted me my whole hour break.
Mm.
And at that point, at your lowest, when you are starving, that half a packet of KP peanuts, you could have given me a Mark 1 Escort Mexico, or. And then I learned in life then that the life lesson for me then was everything is relative. So there's a relative wealth, there's a relative happiness, there's a relative elation and everything else. And depending on the situation or the circumstance you're in is relative. So I can't think of a time in my life where I felt so elated and chuffed to bits and happy, of being given a gift selflessly by someone that could have easily ate a packet and not told me.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and to recreate that now when you're back into society with the materialistic world we live in and all of that stuff. And I go back to that peanut story, and I think about, Yeah, half a packet of peanuts. What an amazing story.
Mm.
And me and Stu still discuss that. So my high point of the row is eating half a packet of peanuts, not the finish.
That's phenomenal.
It's
Yeah.
mad, isn't it? But
Yeah.
Stu's definitely. So I can talk on behalf of Stu's is finishing and getting
Yeah.
it done
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
seeing his family and his children and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great story. And obviously, again, there's probably quite a few low points.
My lowest point was my daughter boxes, and she had her first competitive boxing belt. And I managed to get on a sat phone, and she'd finished school, and I said, Lace, shall we chat through about your fight and your prep and everything else? You know, stay humble. The best person to win, and all of those things that I want her to just be disciplined, just give a good account of yourself. And she said, "Oh, Dad, can we do this chat tomorrow? Before my fight." And I said, "Cool." She said, "I've finished school. I'm tired. I've been to the gym." And I said, "Yeah, okay, darling." So she puts the phone down, and I said to Stu, "Reminder, call. We got her." And the sat phone wouldn't fire up.
Oh.
The sat phone wouldn't fire up for me to phone my daughter before her fight, and it broke my heart.
Mm.
So I couldn't get to speak to my daughter. I did shortly after, um, but I promised her that I would chat with her and would go through, her mindset for it. That I'm super proud of her before she fought anyway, and all of those things. But I never got to have that conversation, and absolutely let her down through no fault of my own.
Yeah. I
She
suppose
understood,
that's one
and
of
I
the
and I phoned
things.
her afterwards, but it was
Yeah.
tough. That was my lowest point.
Yeah. I suppose that's one of those things like we spoke about in terms of it's out of your control,
Yeah.
but it still has that effect, obviously. Like, and obviously she forgives you and she'd understand that situation.
Mm.
But yeah, I can imagine how that would be like
It's
really hit
it'd be,
you.
but the only saving grace for me is again in life, like try and take that opportunity. Um, so the things that I discussed with her, Lace called time on that conversation because she was tired. But
Mm.
there probably wouldn't have been a lot more than I would have said, other than I'd already told her that I was proud of her.
Mm.
Stay humble. If you lose, you lose. That person will probably become your best friend.
Yeah.
And all of those things in relation to sport and boxing. Um, so it wasn't. I had got some of what I wanted to try and discuss with her prior to her fight. I managed to get some of that across.
Mm.
So it wasn't 100% that I haven't spoke to her at all. But yeah, that was my lowest point, letting my daughter down.
And talking about mindsets a bit then. So we've spoken before a bit and you mentioned how you and Stu had sort of very different outlooks on it and slightly different
Hmm.
mindsets surrounding it. So tell us a little bit about that and how that worked together.
So it's really, really strange because I think you can change your mindset for different things. So before I talk about my mindset and Stu's mindset, so if I was to box or play football, I would want to win.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I wouldn't just spar or turn up to a football match. I would just have a kickabout and stuff, So I have got a competitive streak. I think when you look at our boat, our experience, I only had 8 months' notice and everything else. I don't think we were ever in a position to compete for the fastest pair or whatever or break any world records or stuff. So
Mm.
for us, and it was never about that. It was always about raising money for charity, and Stu losing that stigma for mental health. So that's what Minds Matter does. It's driving that really, just getting people to talk and stuff. So mindset wise, I looked at the enormity of rowing the Atlantic, and that's not like walking up Butser Hill or anything like that. This is massive. So for me personally, I looked, and you learn this when you're out there. So I didn't want to win. My only goal was to help my mate out, because he's trusted me to do that, and I won't let him down, and to finish and get back to my family and my friends safe. And thirdly, to raise money, a massive amount of money for both charities. So that was my goals there. So in order to celebrate that, Stu's goal's the same. So Stu wanted to get to the end of a row, look like Robinson Crusoe, give his wife a big hug, and the world thinks, me and Stu are great, which is fine, and enjoy your success. I'm not going to take that away from Stu. But he's a destination guy. I thought that doesn't work for me because however long that gap is, if it's 50 days, and as it was, if it was 65 days or 64 days to get across, then I don't reward myself at all for that length of time.
Mm.
So Stu now set himself up that he has to grind out and work probably the hardest he's done and be the lowest he's been for 64 days before he says that he's done well. And I thought that doesn't work for me. So I promised myself every 2 hours that I rode, my mindset was I'm going to reward myself after every 2 hours. So I'm going to go out, I'm going to be disciplined, I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to do the best shift I can do.
Mm.
Yeah. And after that 2 hours, I'm going to physically say out loud, Sads, that's a good shift. And in the back of my mind, I would then know I've given a good account of myself. There's less rowing strokes to do. So I've chipped away at that massive mountain. There's less strokes to do. And no matter what, except the storm lockdown days, I'll be closer to my destination than I was prior to my shift. So I rewarded myself 12 times a day. And I said it out loud. Probably annoyed Stu with it, actually. He said, Sads, well done. That's a great shift. Yeah. And even when you're low, so we had a repeater on the cabin, as you look at, a black box that should have told us our direction and speed, but we had no power. And mentally, so the biggest influence for me in my life would have been my granddad, really. And I miss him dearly every day. But I changed my boat into Big Brother. This is sound lunacy. That's a camera watching me, and my granddad is watching every stroke. So I can't fail. I cannot cheat and sit there and pretend I'm pulling. I'm going to pull every stroke because I want to get to the finish line. So I was honest with that. So I rewarded myself 12 times a day, out loud, pat on the back, and Stu never rewarded himself. I did. I said, Stu, that's hell of a shift. Look at the distance we've come. But it's water for ducks back to him because he needs to get to the finish.
Mm.
He's a destination guy. So are you a journey guy or are you a destination guy?
Mm.
And it came together smack bang on halfway. So when we did 1,500 miles, we downed the oars and we saved a can of Coke each and a tube of Pringles, ready salted. And we sat there, and it's a real strange discussion. We were both chuffed to bits, and Stu was elated then. So it was a sort of a half celebration for Stu. And Stu said, Sads, we're smashing it. We've got 1,500 miles to go, mate. We got this. And I turned around to Stu and said, mate, I'm celebrating completely the opposite, mate. I said, Stu, we've done 1,500 miles, mate. Look behind and how far we've come for 1,500 miles.
Mm.
Said, that's a superb achievement. Anything from here is all downhill. Technically, it's not, but... And he said, so we had two complete... I'm looking one way, looking how far we've come, and he's looking the other way of how far we've got to go. But both celebrating the same moment at 1,500 miles. So hence why probably when I reflect back, and it's only just dawned on me now, is why the finish was a bit overwhelming in that. I'd had so many celebrations of success throughout my row, and Stu didn't. So that's why he probably enjoyed the finish
Yeah.
a
Every
lot
2
more
hour
than
shift was a
sort of I
success.
did, yeah.
It sort of makes me think of one of my favourite books is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm.
Short book, but he was taken to the prisoner camps in World War II. So he spent 3 years in various
Mm-hmm.
concentration camps. And he spoke about mindset in that. So I think there was a Christmas, I think it was the Christmas of 44. So obviously just coming up to the year before the war ended. But few people in camp had started to hear about the Allies getting closer
Mm-hmm.
and that it would be done by Christmas and they'd be freed. And they set that in their mind. So they were thinking, okay, we're going to be free by Christmas. And he was a very, I don't know what the word, maybe you could say stoic in a way, but he's very much just every present moment, I'm just going to act out. I have the choice to decide how I act in this moment. And that's his
Absolutely.
mindset. And that's one of the big takeaways from that book. But when that time came and Christmas passed and the Allies weren't there, and then the next few weeks passed, these people actually started to die. Like, and it was almost like he was saying, like, because they just lost hope and they'd
Given up.
lost, because they'd set their mind so strong on that time. As it started to pass, they just lost hope and they stopped eating, and they just, quite a lot of them started to just die, unfortunately. But yeah, obviously it's slightly
No,
different,
no,
but
no. I relate to you,
100%, I
yeah.
sort of, it sort of made me think of that, and that just taken in the moment.
Absolutely.
And obviously, like in your case, where you're expecting it to be 50 days, potentially those last few extra days, maybe in Stu's mind, wasn't sort of expecting, and it could have been a lot harder. And even if it went even longer, how that would have affected him potentially.
That's completely relatable to Stu because he would be monitoring on a tracker. There's a tracker you can follow all boats and individual teams and stats and stuff. And he's so competitive. He was competitive with every other pair that was rowing.
Oh, really?
And if they made more miles than us, he'd be fuming.
Yeah.
So to manage that, I knew that we were in an old boat, and you get to choose your route across. You can do a northerly route, a southerly route, a mid route, whatever you choose. Once you leave Tenerife, you get one coordinate you have to go under, and then how you get across is entirely up to you. Um, and I said, Stu, you're investing too much time in worrying about other things that are out of your control, So I had to not manage Stu, but I would give him. Stu needs to be doing stuff. So let's have a look if we can get rid of any mouldy food, or do we need to carry 20 litres of water? Why don't we carry 10? That's, 15 litres less weight. And how could we, should we jump out and clean the hole a bit more frequently than once a week? Or all of these things for him to think about, which sort of ease that pain. He said, right, we're going to clean the hole twice a week now. Yeah, cool. That'll speed us up, or let's trim the boat a little bit better. We're a bit bow heavy. Let's move some stuff to the stern, or let's trim it and let's balance it right. And right, is there anything else we can jettison? Like all the food that's ruined, put in the sea. The fish will have that. Not wrappers. It's a clean.
Yeah.
It's a clean crossing, and they're very, very strict on that.
Yeah.
You can't pollute at all. So had to give Stu things to work on to make it less painful for him because he's that guy. We should 50 days. We should be in by now. It doesn't matter. We're not. So that's out of our control. Let's keep grinding out.
Yeah.
And I'd say to him every day, Stu, be consistent and be honest, and we'll get there, mate. We'll get there. We'll get there when it goes back to my comment. We'll get there when the Atlantic wants us to get there, mate. Not when you want to. There's lots of bigger things.
Yeah.
Bigger things in motion, and how many down days Stu had, and the hallucination and stuff like that. Stu had a really tough crossing, and we always, we rode together in the week, and we always talk about it and stuff. And the next time Stu's approach, I think, will be different for the Pacific. I think so.
And hallucinations. Did you hallucinate as well?
I did too. So I did too, and Stu must have had about 30. I kept a diary, and I've not looked at the diary at all.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, Stu wants to read it. It probably won't be that complimentary on some pages, but
is that a diary of the whole row as well?
I did a diary of the whole row every day.
Good to. That would
It's
be really
scraggly writing because some of the days in the storm where it turns over and stuff, it's like a 2-year-old's written it type thing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I will. I might do it. I might do it this year.
Okay.
So So in December, from December the 12th, I'll read every day. Try and read every day. But So I was rowing, and it was a strange, and I didn't realise how exhausted I must have been. And I've never done drugs, from my teenage years and stuff. I've not been an angel, but I've never experienced with drugs or experiment or anything like that. So I've never done the rave thing and all of this party type scene. So for me, it was quite frightening. So I was rowing, and I looked up, and in the distance, a few, probably about 20, 30 metres away, was a lady. And do you remember the Black Widows Scottish Widows advert? The lady in the black veil.
In the black veil, yeah.
And it was exactly like that lady walking across, holding a bowl. And she walked right up to the boat, and I thought, she can't be, it sounds crazy, I promise you. Rowing, and I stopped rowing. I said hello, and she said, hello, Craig. And I said, all right. And she said, yeah. And she said, I've brought you something. And she offered me a wicker basket bowl with a doily full of sherbet lemons. Crazy, isn't it?
Right.
And then that's not even my favourite sweet. So, but I wasn't ungrateful. But she's not really there. And she offered me these sweets. She said, take as many as you want. I said, can I take some for Stu? She said, grab a handful, Craig, honestly. And I can visually remember, as clear as day, putting my hand going straight through the bowl. And I said to her, I can't grab them. She said, try harder. And just crazy. Yeah. And then it all sort of went. I thought, what? But I would swear that was real.
Wow. That's
crazy,
fascinating, isn't it? Yeah.
And then another time, my second one was I was rowing, and I can remember nodding and looked forward, and there was a little girl sat outside the cabin. And I said, what are you doing there? And she said, "I'm just watching you, Craig." And I goes, "You can't sit there." I goes, "Where's your mum and dad?" And she said, "Oh, they're in the cabin with Stu." And I went, "Well, get in the cabin then." I goes, "You haven't got a life jacket." I goes, "You got nothing." I goes, "It's really rough." She said, "I'm fine, Craig. I'm watching you." And I thought, "No, this can't be happening." And rubbed my eyes. And then obviously she disappeared and stuff. But Stu was, and that's the only two that I had. Had some strange experiences and stuff. But Stu was a helicopter pilot. Um, he was playing badminton. He was going to jump out the boat and swim to another boat that wasn't there to get us both a pizza.
Oh, no. Oh,
I'm
my
serious.
gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And it got to the point where very, very frustrating. So in the end, we agreed to do it like work because I said, "Stu, you can't perform like this. Like, I mean, this is on 2 hour stints. So I would row, plot our chart. He would row, and we've lost miles because he's hallucinating and
Yeah.
flying a helicopter and stuff. And in the end, so I said, "Stu," and during the day he said, "Oh, Sad, so did you play badminton last night?" I said, "How am I going to play badminton here?" So we did it like a BA brief. So I would be an ECO,
Right.
and I would say, "Stu, right, you are Red One or Alpha One, whatever it is nowadays. So
Yeah.
you are Alpha One. Your job now is to row for 2 hours till from 10 till 12, and this is our bearing, 270 degrees. You're rowing consistently for 2 hours. That star configuration's there. You got it." He said, "Right, yeah, I'm rowing for 2." And you'd had to do almost like an authoritative BA brief for him to perform on the nights he hallucinated
Right. Okay.
because you have to bring him back. Say, "You're not at work. You're not in a
Yeah.
helicopter. You're not in a pizza parlor."
Yeah.
He thought he was in
Dangerous as well
Peaky
if he'd
Blinders.
like obviously jumped
Very dangerous.
overboard, tried to swim somewhere.
Very dangerous. And I used to have to make sure he's clipped on. So if he's
Yeah.
going to jump out and swim for a pizza, and the knock on of that, like I said to Stu in hindsight, is I didn't sleep very well
Yeah.
because I'm wiping and looking out for him to make sure he's still on the seat, make sure we're still rowing, and
Mm.
yeah, very, very, very tough that is. So he
Mm.
suffered really, really bad with that, with
Yeah.
hallucinations.
Yeah.
So
It's fascinating to hear because so few people will understand that, like pushing your body to that level where you start to hallucinate. And I've heard stories of other people
oh,
doing
it's
it.
crazy.
And
So it was yeah, because I wouldn't believe that. So, and one of the things when you go to Devon to do your ocean rowing course, they talk about that. So they talk about you will suffer, bad skin on your hands and your bum and the muscle aches and exhaustion and all of those things. But they discuss hallucinate. They say you will hallucinate
mm.
at some point on the road when your body is just on autopilot, really.
And looking back,
Hmm.
so looking back after the fact, obviously you spoke a bit about the you finished and how that was for you. In fact, one thing, what was the
Hmm.
first thing you ate when you landed?
So you get off the boat, everybody cheers, and there's photographs and stuff like that. And it's a bit surreal, really, because they set up a parasol and almost a pub round table in the middle of Nelson's Harbour on the lawn, all cordoned off.
Yeah.
And you sit there and they bring you out a beer and they bring you out burger and chips for you
Nice.
and your wife and family. And you think, and you've craved this, it's almost, yeah, again. So I suppose if you looked at high points, having a burger and chips put in front of you after,
Yeah.
65 days of not eating anything really. But then there's about 200 people watching you eat and taking photographs of you and stuff. So it's like cordoned off,
Yeah.
probably similar to an incident, really.
Yeah.
And you're there with your family eating. And it's a real strange thing because, today, if me and you went for burger and chips now, light work.
Mm.
But to eat it after not being able to eat, I think we managed a few chips and a couple of bites of burger and your stomach was cramping up and you had to sort of ease back into it. So, yeah, so burger and chips was the first thing that was
Nice.
served up. It was lovely. It was
Yeah.
amazing. And they're really lovely people there. They really
Yeah.
took care of you sort of thing.
So
But don't forget, you can't walk. So, where you've sat down for 64 days, you almost have to learn how to walk again.
okay.
So you have to be aided. So my wife sort of
How long did it take you to sort of get back to walking unaided?
probably maybe 3 to 4 days to walk properly.
Wow.
But there's an interesting story of that. So you've got a beard, you haven't washed for 2.5 months. Um, your personal hygiene's horrendous, really, and your body's in really bad condition, and your wife's holding you. So once all of the all the razzmatazz is done at the finish. Me and Stu were in different hotels. So my wife had booked a hotel, and I always remember pulling up at the hotel, and I was so chuffed to see. But everything's a bit of a haze then because you're back in society and
Mm.
you've been so isolated. It's really, really. There's a real adjustment period. But she's walking me into the hotel, and the hotel's got lots of Americans and Canadians and stuff in there, and you can see people touch it like a wife touch her husband, say, you know, and what they're thinking. They
Mm.
think it's a typical Brit that's gone out, got absolutely plastered, and his poor suffering wife has had to go and collect him from some marina or something.
Yeah.
Um,
Look at the state of him.
Look at the state of this guy. How do you get that drunk? Sort of thing. He can't even walk.
Yeah.
Look at the state of him. But as it transpires, when you stay in that hotel, and I don't know how, but word spreads of what you've done and stuff, then
Mm.
it soon changes, and everybody wants to, buy you a beer and all this sort of stuff. But yeah, but everyone thinks, God, look at the state of that guy. He's about a heavy session, and his suffering wife has come to collect him, sort of thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
so.
And looking back on it,
Mhm.
so after the fact, obviously you've touched on a few things. What would you say is sort of the main lessons that you've learned from it?
So I do a lot of talks to school. Um, so there's a few things. I think you can't lose sight of that I was privileged to do it. So especially as I didn't chase it and it wasn't one of my dreams. So, and I try and share that with others. So I was very, very lucky to do it. So very lucky to be on a podcast with you. Very lucky to be able to share my story. And if just one person's interested in it, then that's amazing. But what I've learned from it is I was brought up by my mum with my brother. My dad leaves home at 7. We lived on a council estate. Never been in a yachting background or sailing background. So almost not a hard luck story, but humble beginnings.
Mm.
And I think that my lesson to the children is, or the kids or anybody really in life is opportunities will come your way. Yeah. And you might not even see them right up until that moment. So never give up on an opportunity or achieving a dream because there's could be or will be an opportunity just around that corner.
Mm.
So if you'd said to me 3 years ago or 30 years ago, you'll be rowing the Atlantic or you'll do Everest or you do all these wonderful things, um, I wouldn't have believed it. But you've just got to keep up and opportunities will come your way. I promise you. It might not be tomorrow, it might be in a year's time, it might be in 10 years' time, but there will be opportunities in your life and you need to be ready to accept those.
Yeah.
So, and then I say to the kids is, um, where you start doesn't define you, so you can row round Hayling Island in a kayak or do the Isle of Wight and stuff like that. And then what builds from that, you end up rowing the Atlantic, so you can start in a kayak, but you can row an ocean,
Mm.
and that's relative to anybody. If you want to run 1K, you might do a marathon, you might do an ultra, so it's about starting that journey, but where you start, that doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to be there. You can finish somewhere else
Mm.
and you can achieve so much more. I always share my personal thing about what we touched on about being out of your comfort zone because you truly find out who you are. So I think anybody can row an ocean. So some people might look, oh, I don't fancy that. I don't do that. I think physically anybody could row an ocean. I think it's about trying to get the mindset to row an ocean. And I think that's the trick. So if you want to run a marathon or run a 10K or the Great South Run, or whatever it may be, the most important thing to do is your mindset. Um, and if you set your goal as the Great South Run or whatever, and I say to these kids, if you're actually sat there on a settee or you've been on your Xbox or whatever, and you actually think of getting up and going for a run, you absolutely need to embrace that and reward yourself that thought process has started. You haven't even run a mile, you haven't even put any trainers on, but that thought process is positive. That's growth. That is progress. So the next time you might think about going for a run and put your trainers on. Next time you might put your trainers on and go out and open the front door and walk to the shops. Then you might run. Then you might. So very few people get up and run an ocean or get up and run a marathon. Or there's a whole process to go through for that,
Mm.
and that starts with the thought process. Yeah. So the fact if you're thinking about being out your comfort zone, or you're thinking about bettering yourself, or doing something you've never done before, you can't just have that as a thought and it goes. You've got to try and lock that thought in.
Mm.
So you try and hold on to that thought. Actually, I thought about going for a run, and then, I might go for, and then it builds, and then it builds, and you'll see progress. And reward yourself for thinking that.
Mm.
Don't go out and I'm going to run 5K, and you do 1K, come home with a long face, and you sulk. You've done 1K more than you've done, so you've got to reward yourself for the 1K. And people, kids, and society and the world is so tough at the moment. There's all these expectations, and you've got to be like somebody else, and you've got to achieve, and you've got to win at everything. A lot of the a lot of the things that I do different now is through failure, not through winning. Run a marathon, pulled my calf. I only should have stretched off a bit better. Should have prepped a bit. And you'll get to finish a marathon,
Yeah.
but all the lessons you learn aren't running that marathon. It's how you got to that point.
Yeah.
And that's what I say to these kids. If you ever get an opportunity to put yourself out of your comfort zone, or climb that rope, or, I don't fancy that. I don't give it a go. If you do it and you don't like it, that's fine. It's not about scare tactics and forcing people to do things they don't want to do. And I think for people like me and you, like in the fire service, and we have kids visit station, and I'm very, very lucky. I go to lots of schools and talk to kids. Is you can dress things up. So in Hampshire, you've got Butser Hill. So there's a trig point at Butser Hill. And if I went to a load of kids, and I've done this, and said, right, it's a gloomy day, it's muddy, put some shoes on, and we're going to frog march up Butser Hill to the top of Butser Hill. Right, let's get this out, left, right, left. They're not interested.
Yeah.
The same outcome sold different. So, guys, look, put some boots on, get some fresh air. You see a bit of wildlife. There's cows and sheep and stuff. I said, and at some point today, you're going to stand somewhere, and no one in the whole county of Hampshire will be higher than you. What? So you can stand on a trig point, and you can say, for the whole population of Hampshire, you're the highest person at that moment in time. Take a selfie,
Yeah.
put it on whatever you want, and celebrate the fact. And you can go home and say to your mum and dads, or where, do you know what? At this time today, at 12:10 today, no one was higher than me in Hampshire. What an
Mm.
achievement. Yeah, I'll have some of that. And it's the same thing, just dressed different.
Yeah. That reframing of something.
Just to reframe something so it becomes more appealing than, right, let's trudge through a load of mud up to the top of Butser Hill. That doesn't even appeal to me.
Yeah.
So, and that's sort of the message I share. So Stu's message is more about stigma of mental health. And that was the drive for us. Mine is about go out your comfort zone, and you can achieve a lot more than you think you can achieve.
It's a conversation that I've actually, whatever the topic of my podcast episode is, a lot of it always comes back to this same sort of thing, like the idea of trying things, failing at things, and that's where you learn.
Absolutely.
And also, in terms of like that comfort zone, everything starts with, like you say, like just a thought, like to do something. I think, especially now with social media as well, we see people achieving these things, like the hardest geezer, say, who's just run the length of Africa,
Africa,
right?
yeah, amazing. Yeah.
You see that and you think, that's phenomenal. I could never do that. But then you don't think to the start of his journey where he wasn't a runner and he thought, oh, I'm going to go out and try and run today. And he
Absolutely.
probably did a few K and was like, this ain't for me. But then stuck with it and like kept going. And you don't see the lead up to that thing. You just see this phenomenal feat.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even with people who don't know you will see the row, but they won't think back to when you first started and think like it just started with the thought. And everyone who's ever done anything, it's always started somewhere with a thought and a very simple action. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
And every run starts with a single step,
a
doesn't it?
step. Yeah,
You know.
yeah, I like that a lot. One other thing that we were going to talk about. So obviously it's been a lot on the road, rightly so, I think. But you've been a firefighter for 27 years, or in the fire service, I should say. But
Yep.
that's a long time to be in any career.
Mhm.
Fire service tends to be, sometimes you have a longer career anyway. But what have you learned from that experience?
So in a nutshell, I've been very, very lucky in my career, with the watches that I've been on and the watches that I've managed. I consider myself to be very, very lucky and very, very privileged. And I think my old gym instructor, Gary Birch, shared this with me, but I think it epitomises the fire service. I think you're only as good as who you surround yourself with. So, and I think in life, not just the fire service, I think if you surround yourself with good people, then, A, you'll never be alone, and B, literally the world's your oyster.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think through the hard times in and out of the fire service, from operational calls to personal life, I think those tough times, which everybody has in their life, the one thing from the fire service that has made my life and my journey a lot easier in and out of work.
Mm.
Um, and wind it back to why I joined the fire service was I wasn't an angel as a teenager, so I was really naughty. And the irony and I share this story with a lot of schools, and they're really pleased that I do say it because we're in a world where everything's polished and sterile. But I had a fight once in a pub, and two retained firefighters at the time, Phil Stairs and Ralph Hutton, and they must have saw something good in me, and I thought I was great, and clearly I wasn't. And they said, "Craig, look, we see something good. Why don't you come to the fire station?" I said, "No. Why would I want to be a firefighter?" And Phil Stairs said, "I told you he wasn't man enough for it." Yeah, and that one comment,
Yeah.
way back then, I couldn't shake. And I remember going home that night, and I can still see exactly where we were, and Phil Stairs saying it to me. So it was a massive impact moment in my life. And on the Sunday, I couldn't shake it. And on the Monday, I said, "Right, I'm going to go to the fire station."
Yeah.
And I went to the fire station. It was singly the best decision I ever made. And then what I learned, and for anybody out there, because I wasn't a grade A student and, super bright at school and all the rest of it. But what I soon learned in my life, and this is true for anybody, so if I'm going around, and I steal a motorbike or mess about and all the rest of it, to actually help someone, the feeling is tenfold. So I'm very, very lucky. If you looked at my fire service career, like yourself, so we get to help people um, every single day of our lives.
Mm.
And it's always someone that's less fortunate than us.
Yeah.
And the reward on that isn't monetary or isn't showing off. It isn't any of that. It's just that self reward of making that person's day better. So for me, the fire service, I think, saved my life and has allowed me to have a great life, really.
Mm.
Because I say that to kids as well, is when you look at careers, and there's so much pressure on kids now to do that, get the grades, I want you to do that. But the long and short of it is you could have 40 jobs, you could have one job. But before you choose a career path or what you do, I always say to kids, you're a long time at work. Yeah. So, and from if you want to stack shelves in Tesco's, that's absolutely fine. That's cool. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you want to drive around in a Ferrari and Lamborghini, don't join the fire service, obviously. Um, but if it's monetary, then look for a high paid job. But if it's a return and you actually want to make a difference to people and help people, then you have like your nurses, your fire service, your police, your ambulance, and all of those public services. And a lot of kids don't think about that. You get the grade A's, then they do university. I want to be a doctor, and that's amazing.
Mm.
Don't get me wrong, but pick something that you're going to look forward to. I still look forward to going to work 27 years later,
Yeah.
and that speaks volumes.
Yeah. 100%.
So I think there's too much pressure. I've got a firefighter on my watch, Fest, and he's had 40 jobs. The fire service is his 40th job, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's cool. What a life experience of a postman, and he's been a doorman, and he's a lorry driver, and you name it, he's sort of done it. So, but yeah, and I think you're a long time at work, so pick wisely. And if you look forward to going to work, if you love what you do, it's not really work, is it? So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really important. I think, like you say, there's a lot of pressure to go down certain routes, maybe for the wrong reasons.
hmm
But just doing something that you're going to get value from. I don't think you can really get bored of that as long as you still find value from it. Like you say, you still 27 years later are finding that you're like looking forward to going into work,
absolutely.
and that's something that not a lot of people could say. I don't think,
No, and
unfortunately, but
yeah, and be brave enough to change it as well. I left school, did an apprenticeship as a welder, thoroughly enjoyed welding, but as as a person, I'm far happier in the fire service than I am welding in the dockyard.
Yeah.
So go through careers and pick. You'll find what you like,
Mm.
or more importantly, what you don't like. You know, that's not a career path. I thought I'd like that, but I didn't. So, and there's no shame in changing, or
Yeah.
you know.
I was speaking to Rob Reed in episode 26, actually. So he was talking about that idea. He's done quite a lot of things
Hmm.
in his life, and he was speaking about exactly what you're saying. There is each time you do something like for you welding, and you decide it's not for you, you're finding out who you're not.
Absolutely.
So you're trying things.
Hmm.
Okay, I've learned from it, but it's
Hmm.
not me. What's next? And
Absolutely.
then the next thing. And like you say, the guy's got 40 jobs, nothing wrong with that because he's, if anything, excellent. Fair play to him because he's just kept trying and trying and trying
Absolutely.
and learned who he's not. This isn't for me. Cool. What's next?
Yeah. What's next? I'll try that. Oh, that's not for me. What's next? You know. Um. Yeah. So much pressure to follow a career path, and you know.
Mm. And on the topic of school
Hmm.
talks, and you said you've done some school talks. What sort of things is it you're trying to get across to kids?
So it goes back to that. So there's so much pressure from even for my own children to perform well at exams. Now, if you're a grade A student and you're going to get great grades and you're going to go to further education, sixth form, university, college, that's fine. But if you're not and you're more practical and you don't get grade A's, that's not life over.
Mm.
There are still so many opportunities and so many jobs, and you've still got your whole life. A measure of success isn't how well you do in exams. As long as you're true and honest and you've done the very, very best you can, that's what it is. You can't change that. You can't go back. You can just focus on what you do about that.
Mm.
So, a more potentially, if you're not that academic, then maybe look at a more practical sort of career. It may be a trade or either or we go back to something you love. But if I don't get my grades, I'm not good. But you've still got your health, you've got family, focus on the positives. And again, I try and go back to about worrying about stuff. So why worry about an exam once it's done? And for me, why worry about exam pre it?
Mm.
If you're honest and you've done the best revision you can for that exam, you do it, put it to bed, and then you just hold your head high. And what will be, and you'll adjust your path in life accordingly, really. You know? Um, yeah, I try and say to them, don't, and you see some of these young kids and they're so stressed out and maybe pressure from parents or, to please people or a career path they really want, but everyone finds their way.
Yeah. Yeah. For
Everyone
sure.
finds their way, you know. I always share the message about opportunities. So, you know, don't give up on opportunities. And I always share, it doesn't have to be rowing an ocean. Rowing an ocean is more of like an analogy of being out your comfort zone. If you don't run and you're going to attempt to do a 1K run, that's out of your comfort zone. So everything's relative.
Mm.
So, and everything has a process, but everything starts with a thought and then a mindset. Um, but the main one with the kids is we always touch on social media, and I know you touch on it. So the angel and the demon of social media and Facebook and Instagram and stuff. So I think if you prepare yourself to go on social media, it's fine because me and Stu wouldn't have shared our story. We wouldn't have been able to raise nowhere near amount of money as we did without social media and Instagram.
Yeah.
People logged into it. That's how a lot of the stuff was shared on the row. And I think if you accept, so what somebody or is on Facebook, 99% of the time is the very, very best of that person's life.
The highlights.
The highlights. So, and I take it back to when I was young. If you went to a wedding and someone took 30 photos of your wedding, you would have the best wedding photo up on your front room wall. You wouldn't put all 30 up. So I think if you understand that that person probably really is on that beach, in that location, at that time, amazing. But that's a snapshot of time. There's always a backstory. There's always 100% of us experience the highs and lows of life. We experience hard times, good times. And you have to accept that that's the very best of that person's life. It's not reality. Never measure yourself against somebody else. Success is an individual thing.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I want to be like so and so. I want to look like this, and the pressures of this, and it's just
Yeah.
be you.
Yeah.
And be you and be a good you. Be the very best you. That's pretty much it, really.
Lovely
So,
takeaways and lovely lessons that you're giving to these kids. So yeah, good work on that. Um, so to finish off,
mhm,
so I'm starting to do this thing at the end of the episodes. So what I want you to do
okay.
is come up with a question that listeners can take away. So if you're listening still, listen in. Listeners can take away and start a conversation with someone in their lives. It could be a family member, a friend, a colleague, a stranger, but a question that they can take to open up a conversation. Because I enjoy having these
Mhm,
conversations. I want other people to have something that they can start with and have a conversation themselves.
okay. I think, as a conversation opener, tell me something achievable and relative that would put you out of your comfort zone.
Very
I think
nice.
that.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, good.
Okay. So thank you for coming on. I've really enjoyed it.
Sam, thanks for having me.
If people want to find you online, follow what you're doing, obviously minds matter as well.
Mhm.
Where can they find you?
Yeah, so on all three platforms, so we have a Minds Matter page, and that's a story of pre-row, the actual row, and the bits and pieces that we do post-row. So talks and fundraising, and then hopefully, people are interested. They can follow the prep for us to have a crack at the Pacific in 26.
Yeah, I'm sure they will.
So
Yeah, I'll put all of the links and stuff in the description as well, so people can go down
I
and click in
appreciate
that
that.
as well. From our side, so if people have enjoyed the episode, hopefully you found some value from it. So do share it with someone who you think would enjoy it as well. If you can rate the show, whatever platform you're listening or watching on, that really helps as well. And also on Instagram, you can follow us. We're at Lonely Chapter Podcast. The same on TikTok, and on Twitter it is lonely_chapter. And lastly, from me, thank you for listening.